everyone. I hope everyone can hear me in the back. I'm going to try and project as best I can. My name is Robin Wilcox. I'm the head of programming for the DesignTO Festival. And I wanted to say to those of you who have not yet, if this is the first time you're encountering the festival, DesignTO is a nonprofit arts organization. We are Canada's leading and largest celebration of culture. And right now we're on day 5 of 10 days. We have 5 more days and there's lots more events. You'll be able to see the guides around Lemay. DesignTO started in 2011 as about 6 exhibitions and events, and we've grown to well over 100 exhibitions, events, receptions, workshops, talks across the city like this one. Really, really proud to be partnering with Lemay on this talk. And so a few things. Since 2011, DesignTO has celebrated creativity, we've fostered community, and welcomed experimentation. Welcome to DesignTO Talks Place de Montréalaises. I'm going to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So first I want to say thank you actually to the Ontario Association of Architects who has supported this. If you are looking for your continuing education hours, you can also sign up and we can send a certificate afterwards if you'd like to do that. And I wanted to say thank you again to Lemay, to Nina Bacha and Robert Fiorino for having us. And I want to say thank you to the entire DesignTO team for their dedication and hard work. A lot of the festival is run by volunteers, and it's very grassroots as an organization. And so we appreciate everyone's support by coming out to all of these events. So I'd like to introduce Rob Fiorino, Vice President of Market Strategy for Lemay, who's going to introduce the talk.
Cool, thanks. So I wanted to quickly give a few thank yous from Lemay's behalf. First and foremost, to you, the audience, thank you for coming. Second, to the Lemay people that actually showed up from other places. We have some people from Calgary in the back and Montreal, so thanks for traveling. Also wanted to give a special thank you to Nina for putting all this together. This isn't easy to do. And thank you to
Andrew.
Andrew and Angela for being here and putting this on. So before I forget, after the talk, feel free to mingle, eat, and stay as long as you want, maybe. We'll see. When you get the hook, then you have to go.
Thanks. It's good? Eugene? Yeah? Cool. I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction. I think this is amazing. This isn't quite a crowd. I guess if you fill the room with food and booze, this is what happens. So we know the trick. Thanks for coming out. Rob did all the thank yous, but again, I want to reiterate, lots of people here, whether with Lemay or not, from Montreal, from other places, so thanks for coming. I'm going to give a quick overview of the project, and then we're going to get into the slides. The project was an international design competition, anonymous design competition for Montreal. We competed as a way to sort of loosen up we just finished a very large project for a 27-station metro system. So we kind of loosened up with this project and thought it would be an exercise within the Lemay lab, within the design team, to try and do this. In the end, we ended up doing a scheme that we were quite proud of. We ended up getting into the second phase, and then we ended up winning this project. So the context is really, it's an international design competition, which for us has strong meaning. It was anonymous. It was a powerful new context for us. The second thing is that it really does. Angela's sitting next to me. I've got notes here, and I usually don't refer to notes when I talk, but the one big note is Patricia, and that's Patricia Lucier, who the creative team on this project was Angela, myself, and Patricia, the creative leadership. So Patricia should be here sitting with us. We just couldn't afford the extra plane ticket. It's not true.
It's a joke.
She's super busy. Anyway, sorry, Louis. Louis here. I didn't mean that. Anyway, Louis Lemay. I just wanted to talk about our transdisciplinary methodologies and the fact that we want to work across disciplines. It's one of our key focuses within Lemay, within the Lemay lab. And for this project, that not only included all the disciplines within the firm, all the people committed to design excellence in the different disciplines, landscape engineering, urbanism, architecture, but we brought Angela in as a partner in a conceptual art discipline as a key proponent for the project, and was really reiterated in a visit to New York with one of the jury members that was one of the reasons we had some success with this project. So to that end, the beginning of this presentation is going to be a little bit about that context, about the context of working collectively with Angela on different projects, our history together, but really that notion that architecture and art can converge, and they can converge over a 30-year practice. A little bit of her preoccupations in architecture, my preoccupations, and how those converged then within the Lemay team to develop the project. And we're not going to bore you too much for that. We've promised 5 minutes, but we think it's a nice context. And then we're going to get into the project in particular, and you'll see sort of what our preoccupations are and what our focuses were as we move through. This is the team. Again, the second name on that list is Patricia, absolutely fundamental to our success, one of the great design voices within our firm, a landscape architect. Lucy St. Pierre is here. She leads our I don't know where she is. She's standing somewhere. Right there.
Lucy?
And then there's Jeff Ma. There's a bunch of people on this team who've been on lots of projects. It's a great, great team. This is us, really, Memory City. That's really kind of the notion of this project, and Angela will talk a lot about sort of the conceptual basis of the project. And then this really is a few slides about our previous collaboration. So we've been working together for 30 years on various different projects. Angela in the art world, in the architecture world, and they've converged into a series of projects, whether it was at University of Calgary Gallery, Alberta Biennial in 2005, another project in Calgary for Art City, which was commissioned and published the cover of Canadian Art. The Prix de Rome work that we did in 2003, 2004 was a big piece of research around cinema in the city. And then that became a series of exhibitions with people like Shauna McCabe, who's at the Guelph Art Gallery right now, doing a series of film-based exhibitions, collaborative content in various different galleries, and there are a few of those. My work has fundamentally been a commitment to design excellence across scales, so whether that's small house practice, always using drawings as experimentation in lots of different ways, whether it's the pulled ink drawing as a series of exhibitions around non-line work or typical line sketch work. The use of models both as gestural parties and as much more significant components, and then an early adopter of the digital realm as a kind of way of creating multiple images and multiple drawings. So this notion of models, raw or very, very, I mean, these look raw, but they're actually really expensive, models to create a kind of fundamental gesture towards an idea, and then converging those with lots of different drawing experiments through the work. Privileged to be asked for things like En route magazine's what's the house will look like in 50 years. And then obviously lots of awards, or not obviously, but thankfully lots of awards, lots of recognition for that small practice. And then that moved into a much larger practice about 10 years ago, doing very, very big projects, the biggest of which was the CHUM in Montreal at this point, $2 billion. Shout out to Ross Carter-Wingrove, sitting right over there. He's the guy that built this thing, and we designed this together. And this has changed the city of Montreal and was the reason I ended up relocating in Montreal. But finding within that context, within that very large building context, in this case a PPP hospital, the opportunity for jewels, the opportunity for these moments of design, literally poetic expression, and this is just the passerelle that exists in the CHUM. So that's a quick overview of my stuff. Do you want to, I'll just keep flipping through?
Yeah. So I'm really interested, I'm just going to give a 2-minute overview of my practice. I'm really interested in the idea of the body and communication systems, information systems, and our impulse to communicate, and all our artifacts of communication. So whether it's typewriters, books, text, and really deconstructing all of these things as a way to look at how we communicate, how information moves through systems, what kind of systems we use to communicate, and then looking at the idea as well of metamorphosis and gender. And so all of those things I think you'll see converge for Place Montréalaises, but really looking at, again, these systems of books and their deconstruction and the printing press and our beautiful history of how we store information, where that goes, and what we do with these artifacts. And again, there are bodies and what we do with that to communicate, whether it's the hands, whether it's the voice, the mouth, all of that great stuff.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. So we're going to get to the project now. I do want to make it clear, this notion that Well, I'm going to a shout out to Louis Lemay in the audience. The fact that we're doing the Lemay Lab is this almost, it's both a project delivery, but it's about applied research. And the fact that bringing an exhibited artist into the team, fulsomely into the team as a partner within the project was really one of the key components for this project. So a little bit of context. This is.
Can I just say that with Louis Lemay and the Lemay, it was very, I think, forward-looking to bring an artist in for this project. I think it's so. I wanted to thank him for that.
This is Montreal. This is the context for the project. Given that everybody here, except for a few of you, are from the Toronto-centric world, I thought this is another city in Canada. It's a pretty good one. The M is where the project is. It's right in the middle of the city. It's actually right in the middle of the administrative city, and it's right in the middle of the historic city. So the top line above, this is one of the oldest maps of Old Montreal. During the settlement, the creek or the water path just to the north of the settlement is actually the site. It's where the administrative city is now, and it's the site where this project actually has found itself. In the 60s, if you know the city of Montreal, in the 60s there was a big infrastructural, like in many, many cities in North America, to solve the problem of the car through the creation of a tunnel, the Ville-Marie Expressway, which pretty much moved its way underground all the way through Montreal. This is one of the views, and in its wisdom, that created a series of tunnels. It was part of the identity of the modern city, but it also then created a series of issues, a series of problems that were being resolved in various different ways. So the Ville-Marie was a submerged roadway, highway, that essentially bifurcated the modern downtown Montreal from old Montreal and the administrative city. So we'll talk about the key components around the site, but this is where the site is. Right now we're also at Lemay doing a project down where the orange dot is, called Humanity, which is essentially adjacent to the same street. We spend a lot of time in the CHUM complex, whether it's the CHUM or the CR CHUM. And right now we're also working on a project further up on Quartier de Lumière. So all in this sort of neighborhood that has to deal with this scar of the city that needs in some ways to either be dealt with, either rejuvenated, reverberated. So the CHUM is really, the Place de Montréalaises is really one of, and the CR CHUM, one of these projects that builds over the expressway, builds over the crevasse, which is the Ville Montreal. That includes also Palais de Congrès and the Casa de Dépôt building, big architectural projects that have been being built over the last 20 years. So this is the map context. The city context, so again, lots of big new buildings, the City Hall complex, and then the SCAR, the Ville-Marie Expressway axis, and then these very, very key moments within the city. So for us, the idea of this is the site, this is City Hall, so this is like building a big new plaza in front of Toronto City Hall. This is the Ville-Marie Expressway, and the project's mandate was to create a park that was essentially a commemoration of the women of Montreal. Place de Montréal means the place for the women of Montreal. And it's to commemorate the builders, the women builders of Montreal. There's been lots of debate about who this should be for, and Angela will talk more succinctly about this. That was its primary poetic meaning. Its secondary infrastructural meaning was essentially to create a link, a bridge that went from this major space, the big hospital projects, the series of parks that run Montreal east-west, and link that to the Champ de Mars, and that's a terrible pronunciation, I accept that, but which is the big plaza in front of City Hall of Montreal. So really knitting together, suturing the public space infrastructure of the city by crossing a major road as a passerelle. So two very, very key conditions for the project, and very, very divergent. So that's the sort of context for the project in a way. This is contextualizing it. That shows our diagram, and we'll talk about that more specifically. But then there's Place Viger, another major 60s park in Montreal, and the Champ de Mars, which is essentially in front of City Hall. And then this is the highway moving underneath our site. Very quickly, there's a few technical issues that were really fundamental to the project. Underneath our site is, in the light blue, is the Ville-Marie. It's the highway. It's a big infrastructural element. Pieces of it fall down once in a while, so it's got to be treated carefully. There's an off-ramp onto the site, which we had to deal with carefully. And then the darker blue with that white block, the white block is actually a metro station. It's the Champ de Mars metro station. And that's a subway line. So a very, very complex below-grade condition, which this poetic element, this sort of poetic element, is supposed to find its way across. This is the class participation component. So just the context. So then the idea is that this, Nina's got this model right now. The idea is that there's this one gestural, very, very strong gesture that moves across the site. It carries the component of the landscape. It has an architectural element that raises it into space, and then it has a series of other components. This was originally a competition. These are the two panels. I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but these were the two very, very controlled panels that we put together for the original submission. So trying to remain very, very prescient about the idea, but also trying to be simple and elegant in its presentation. It's part of the graphic strategy of the office generally. And then this is the scheme as it sort of exists now. This is the City Hall. This is the Law Courts building. This is the administrative city, the Champ de Mars, and this project pushes itself very, very, some say quite aggressively, across that landscape and touches this historic component of the city. You're up.
Yeah. Okay, so can you just flip through?
Yeah, I'm going to flip through.
So the mandate, and as Andrew mentioned, was 21 women and how we would commemorate this place to 21 women. So working with that, we were really interested in the idea of, we had the 21 names, 14 women of the Polytechnique and the history of that, and then Jean Mons, Marie-Joseph Angelique, who is a Portuguese slave, and really notions around that. So it was an interesting compilation of women for this site. So we were very much challenged with how to create some sort of commemorative moment on this large site. And our first impulse was to say 21 flowers for 21 women. So the grand gesture of this whole site is actually 400 circles of a meadow, a wild perennial meadow. So we were really interested in the idea of creating a bouquet of flowers in homage to the memory of these women. So that was the larger, broader gesture. As well, we were really looking at the timeline of this perennial garden and thinking about what would grow there and how it would grow, and sort of all the things that we could create with nature, with bees, providing some sort of better eco-culture for nature, because this is in the heart of the city, and it's also sort of a really, what would you call it, Andrew, a black area. It's a heat sink.
It's a heat island.
It's a heat island surrounded by buildings. So we've got all these pressures in trying to unify this site with this big perennial garden. At the same time, we're building this large garden on this sort of huge ramp. So So really looking at the idea as well, there was the sort of the 21 perennial flowers for 21 women, but then there's also the idea of inscription and writing and women, and this idea of how we could look at writing women into this site. So we could really make this a more powerful gesture in making this broader and looking at history and how history has perhaps not talked about women as city builders. And so this site became a potential for that. So it became, using these 21 women, it became more aspirational, really. It became a larger project, I would say, in that we were really interested in looking at history and how we could recognize women and what role they played in building the city. And I think that's a story for North America, it's a story for Europe. I mean, it's just aspirational.
So that primary gesture of the pré fleurie, or the meadow, is then augmented by what we felt were the three key. And when we go back into, actually I'm going to compliment Angela a little bit. Angela, in the meetings, we're having many meetings. We're meeting with the City of Montreal every couple of weeks on this project, and Angela always steps back and says, this is what the project is about. This is what we need to retain, no matter what the struggles of approvals, value engineering, that sort of thing that happen in a project. She's maintained that sort of vision for the project. There's another thing that we've managed to talk about, and that's the key components. And this slide really talks about those key components. The strategy of the project is really around three objects. We called it the created object, the found object, and the transformed object. The found object is the Champ de Mars metro station with a Marcel Ferrand, very beautiful existing piece of stained glass, a piece of stained glass art. The transformed object is there's a little transformer building which pushes itself onto the site. It's this knob that had to be dealt with, which you could either cover in forest or cover in something. You had to deal with it. What we've done is transform it into a moment of homage or a moment of commemoration to the women, and we'll talk about that strategy. And then the created object for us is this gradin, or this series of steps in which you can view back into the space, and you can also move up across the space. So these are these very key architectural moments that are being defined. That's within a system of the objects, this forest, the memory forest, the pré-fleurie, the topography of the site itself, dealing with all those issues that are pushing the ground plane up and around and trying to make something resolved. The idea of a continuous system of movement around the site that's important, the connections to the sites through a series of very meaningful thresholds, and then the passage or the existing clear relationship with the historic context. So these are those three objects which we're going to talk about for a little bit. This is the stair component, this gradin, which I love. It's one of my favorite French words. It talks so much more about the experience of sitting in this set of bleachers that look somewhere, and then being immersed in this radically changing over the seasons meadow, this beautiful big field, which is then surrounded by the city. And we've got this was the original submission, which is all we can actually show you today, but we've got a much more now nuanced understanding of how the names could be merged. This is that architectural component where the on-ramp comes into the site, and the pré-fleurie is then held up as at this very strong cultural, sculptural moment. A beautiful piece of engineering with our team at SNC Lavalin and Lemay, our engineering group, worked on. So this moment that actually the car drivers, they're coming in off the Ville Marie, they actually understand that there's something spectacular happening above. These are the series of studies, the models that are floating around. I need those models back, by the way. That orange one, I've been chasing it for months. And then the spaces that are experienced both above and below the project are absolutely key. This notion of this inclined plane, the notion that there's this one big gesture that links the Hôtel de Ville, the City Hall of Montreal, with the space, with the meadow, and then with the metro station itself, creating this quite large, quite significant amphitheater, and then a component of that makes its way across the site and drops you back down onto Champ de Mars. Again, the project in completion, so the stair, the pré-fleurie, the object, the mirrored object, and the metro station, and then a system of a sort of a gridded system of amenities, water features, park benches, bathrooms, all the sort of services that a large public plaza needs through the definition of an overall grid system. This is the basic programming of the different sites. So there's different components. There's the urban axis, which was important to the city, so a pedestrian link at grade, and then the major passerelle where you move up on a system of ramps, or you move up and then hit a system of stairs, and then the gradin that looks back. The memory component, the sort of, here it says Edicule MTMDET, so it's essentially a service building that we're transforming. So these components, the project has a multiple sort of programmatic use, which is evidenced here. So different spaces at different scales used for different reasons, which was actually part of the program brief so that we understand how the space was being used. And then the model that shows the overall strategies for the site. The notion of experience, the notion of these spaces in which you engage is absolutely key. So this is the Marcel Ferrand stained glass shrouding the metro station, and the fact that this becomes a projection device for, if not the winter experience, but all the experience of the city. So integrating not only Angela's art strategies for the homage component of the project, but integrating the existing art components of the project was absolutely important. This is beginning to show you the shroud and its relationship, the fact that it mirrors the site and links the components, whether it's the préfleuri here or the metro station. And then the memory, the forest memory, essentially the threshold between the city, particularly the hospital city, and the site itself is a heavy dense forest. You know, again, integrated work with our landscape team helped us bring the poetic idea of nature into play, but also helped us understand very clearly the technical parameters of that, and then a close-up of that site. The development of this project, this part of the project, is an individual project, and absolutely almost an art piece in itself. We're even delivering that component of the project very differently. The axis up through the city, this is actually the passerelle of the Shroom, which I showed you earlier in an earlier project. So this link to these jewel-like components of the city, the road underneath, and then the spaces underneath the plaza. That gridded system is a series of green spaces and hard surfaces, and then the view through the Marcel Ferrand landscape. And then the view of the shroud itself, the fact that it encompasses and engorges, sort of converges the whole project together, along with the text components that Angela is creating for this moment. So again, if anything converged those ideas, it's the meadow and this object. And then again, the overall view with that grid. The stair. The préfleuri with the object in between. The idea that the project, one of the notions was you could engage very haptically the flowers as they changed and bloomed. You could engage the site and the objects on the site. So there's a medium scale engagement, and then there's the city engagement. You always understood the city behind as a sort of backdrop for these experiences. Kind of reprieve within the downtown.
So we spent a year in Rome in 2003, 2004, and what really impressed me about Rome was all of the inscriptions, the deep inscriptions into the city. So you really read the city. You physically walk through the city and you read it. And there's something really powerful about the act of doing that. And so I was really interested in somehow bringing the power of that to the site of the Place de Montréalaises, and particularly with women who haven't historically had that kind of power in a way. So really, again, looking at the idea of language and inscription, and beginning with Jean Mance. She's one of the first women to be recognized for the 21 Women. So really looking at her writings and that being a driver for me for this site, and how we can inscribe her memory on this site somehow. And really all of these names, and using the names, using the power of inscription on materials, on surfaces, to inscribe these women, to say that they were here. And yeah. So this is sort of a partie of that, sort of this big slope, and then these women or fragments of language, fragments of letters, and really going into Lemay, into the studio, and they're very generous in me coming in and using the studio to look at scale and size and font and allowing us.
This is our model shop at Lemay at a certain point about a year ago. It's never been this clean. But this was really for the client to come in and understand the scale of the propositions we were looking at, and understand what this would mean visually for the project.
And these actually were prototypes for the actual stairs, and looking at how large they could actually be. And then taking some of the quotations and looking at sites on in different places, and where I could put these quotations of these women on site. And again, it seemed very natural that this large shroud, which is a highly reflective polished surface, would be the place to put the names of these women. And how thick is the steel? Andrew, do you remember?
It's 5/16.
5/16, so it's substantial steel, super thick. And so we will be looking at the idea of perforating the names of these women with quotations into this shroud. And it's almost like an inverse cloister in that it reflects the city, it reflects the viewer, it reflects the name of the women. So it does all these different jobs in one fell swoop.
The intent was also that to a certain degree when the names start to decompose, where they exist singularly as the identifiable names, but then they start to break up. So the word L appears, and the word L then links itself to a lot of other names. So essentially there's a notion of inclusivity in the project to all the women of Montreal. So all the names have the feminine intonation, and they have also lots of connections to lots of different names. This is the stainless steel as it was cut as one of the samples. You want to start with this?
And then this is sort of a 5 foot by 4 foot sample that we got cut in Quebec City, and it was a big deal. It was because it's so thick. It's 300 pounds, so you just can't move it. And it's just, I mean, it's tiny compared to what this larger mirror is going to be.
So this was a test, a technical test, as well as an experiential test to see could we seam and weld it, how effortless, how seamless could this thing look, how deep would the letters be at this more minimal dimension, because we needed, obviously there's lots of things pushing a project around. So this was really the test. It sits in our office now. You can't move it, it's too heavy, but it is this major component, and it's this major, I think it's sitting next to Lucy's desk still, because I keep trying to move it to my area, but no, I can't get anybody to help me. They keep, they say they want me to sign waivers or something. Anyway.
But what we recognized in this is that it's so interactive. You can't help but interact with it, and with that you're with these women in a way, like the names of these women, these letters. So it's powerful in that way.
So this is the last view for the show. This is a bit more abstract, but it really started to become the idea of the sort of haptic engagement of the shroud. I think we're going to finish with the video. If you have some patience, this is Place de Montreal. This is the City of Montreal's video about the project itself. This was a major event when it was announced, and we'll just sort of share this with you.